Welcome to the Breakthrough Moments podcast, a podcast where challenges meet opportunities. I'm Harold, and together with my co-host Lasse, we explore stories of innovators, leaders, professionals, and entrepreneurs, and how they turn obstacles into game-changing breakthroughs. Get ready for insights that inspire and lessons that last. Subscribe now, and let's dive into the moments that define success.
Today on the Breakthrough Moments podcast, we have the pleasure of welcoming Henrik Groth, the CEO of CrossWorkers. With close to 20 years of experience in the IT outsourcing industry, Hans has led CrossWorkers in supplying highly skilled IT professionals to international clients, particularly in Europe. His journey from being an HR director in Denmark to establishing a successful business in Egypt is nothing short of inspiring. Hans will share with us the unique challenges he's faced, particularly around the perception of Egypt as a reliable IT hub and the innovative strategies he's implemented to overcome these hurdles.
Thank you very much, Hans. It's a pleasure to be able to share some of the experiences that we've been facing throughout the years. Look forward to it.
Amazing. So we've had a bit of a discussion before this, but for the people that don't know you, who are you? And what do you guys do?
I'm Danish, located in Denmark. I have done many things in my life. I have a military background, and I also have a commercial background. And for the last, as you said, 20 or so years, I've been working within IT, and especially also within IT nearshoring, offshoring, outstaffing. The service has many names. I've been doing that both in Pakistan and in Ukraine before I started in Egypt, and I've been active in Egypt for 15 years, building up our organization in Cairo there. And the services that we provide is that we're basically benefiting from the fact that we have a huge lack of IT skills in Europe. And that's actually what we supply out of our organization in Cairo. So instead of spending a lot of time trying to find the right people here in Europe, and normally at a very, very high cost, we can basically supply them out of our office in Cairo at normally around 1/3 of the cost. And at the same time, and that's maybe the most important, find the level of skills, the level of domain knowledge which is in demand. So it's normally senior profiles that are the core in our teams. So that's what we do.
Yeah, I think that was a nice introduction. I always ask that question because, we have had the discussion and people can find you online. It's always nice to get it directly from the source. One of the things that you discussed last time we spoke was the selection of Egypt over, let's say, Pakistan and Eastern Europe. Could you go a bit more into what motivated you to choose Egypt as the base for CrossWorkers, and how has that decision shaped the growth, the challenges, and the success over there?
Major question. As I said, I've been working with Pakistan and Ukraine before, and then I basically got the chance to work with or build up my own company. If we look at Pakistan, first of all, very nice people, actually good skills, well educated, fits very well into all sorts of cultures. They have a very good cultural fit and so forth. The disadvantages when I was working with Pakistan was that time zone wise they were on another time zone, and the travel time to Pakistan from Europe was a little bit long. And topping all of that, at that time at least, to be honest, I don't know the situation in Pakistan right now, but at that time we were facing security issues with terrorist attacks and things like that. So that was a bit unpleasant. If we look to Ukraine, which is a very well-known location for many European companies, they've been supplying very, very good skills for a very long time. the whole educational system in Ukraine is extremely good. They are doing some really good technical profiles. There's no doubt about that. At the time, and bear in mind it's 15 years ago that I stopped working with Europe or stopped working with Ukraine. At that time, the cultural fit might not be that good. I think they're getting there now, no doubt about that. Of course, now we also have a security situation in Eastern Europe, which is significantly different from what it was just a few years back. Why didn't I choose to work with Ukraine? It's closer, it's the same time zone as well. And the reason behind that is that my analysis at that time, 15 years back, was that Eastern Europe basically have the same demographic structure as we have in West Europe. On top of that, the last 15 years at least has been a lot of digitalization in Eastern Europe. So the conclusion on that, to make it simple, was that price would increase significantly in Eastern Europe. And if we look at the Baltic states, if we look at Poland, if we look at Ukraine, that has been the fact. Price has really increased significantly to a level where, especially when you look towards Poland and Baltic states, which were some of the first movers on this also, are at a level where the difference is not very big compared to West Europe. So that was actually the reason why I did not choose to work with Ukraine. I could definitely have started up something there pretty fast. And then I basically looked at a map, as simple as that, because there are some significant factors which are important when you choose what location to work with, of course. One is time zones. That is a thing which has increased more in importance over the years. When we first started having things done offshore, it was very much India starting up that whole market. And at that time, we were working in a different way as we are today. Nowadays, we're working agile. We need to be online all the time. We need to talk and discuss and correct and so forth. And then time zones just matters, because end of the day, of course, we can work nights, shifts and so forth, but normally our wives and husbands and whatever are not happy about that in the end. So time zones matters. Travel distance also matters, because it's an illusion that you can just find somebody somewhere in the world and then just never visit them. That will definitely not increase the cooperation. So distance also matters. And then that's kind of a mathematic or exercise to then find where in the world to look. And then you look for, of course, a large population, a large educated population at a very good level, good English skills, and especially also the cultural, what I call cultural readiness, the ability to adapt and understand other cultures and so forth. And if you take all those things into account, I was basically looking at two locations in the beginning. I was looking at Cairo in Egypt, and I was looking in towards South Africa. And then I chose to go to Egypt first, and I basically found everything I needed there. And therefore I disregarded South Africa, because they actually had this long traveling time as well on top of it. The funny thing is that recently I've come across a South African company moving towards Egypt to actually tap into the talent and price levels and so forth. So I think that was also probably a wise move not to go there. So those are the factors that brought me to Egypt. And if we then look at Egypt, and Egypt is in this case also very much about Cairo, then Egypt has a population of 110, 120 million people. Cairo is around 25 million people. They produce around 50,000 IT candidates a year. Good language skills, of course in English, but actually also other languages. And then with a cost level which is good and are fairly stable. Of course, we also see cost increases in Egypt, but we see that all over the world. So those are some of the factors that was decisive, you could say, in choosing Cairo as a location. And I, from time to time, if I do my job in a proper way, I should of course always look towards and say, well, are we in the right place? Should we have a secondary location and so forth? And honestly, I've never really found the reason for doing that, because I haven't stumbled into any locations which had more to offer than what I know from.
Yeah, that's interesting because I also typically, when I was introduced to the concept of outsourcing, finding IT professionals around the world, India, of course, is one of the biggest one, because they produce the biggest amount or the highest head count of IT professionals annually. No wonder, because they're like 1.5, close to 1.4 or 1.5 billion people. But also the fact, and what you saw already like 15 years back, how the cost of using or finding and outsourcing to professionals in Eastern Europe, how the cost increased. And also the fact that you kind of found that sweet spot eventually with Cairo. One of the things that you highlighted, and when we spoke about Cairo and Egypt in general, is it hasn't just been clear skies and roll roses. It's a bit of a challenge there as well, in terms of how it was established in Cairo, how it was to get to know the culture in Cairo. But can you walk us through kind of like the major challenges you counted when you then decided to establish as Cairo, Egypt being the hub, and how you successfully navigated through them? Because you mentioned a couple of the challenges there when you spoke.
You could say when we first started in Cairo, we started and was admitted into a program which was financed by the Danish Foreign Ministry, which was basically aiding Egypt. Very good program in many ways, and the purpose of it was basically to establish a joint venture in Cairo together with a Egyptian company. And that was how we started off, interviewing different companies and making a choice within those companies and so forth. So we started off by doing that. Unfortunately, that cooperation didn't succeed, and didn't succeed because, and that could have been me choosing the wrong companies to work with, but there was a little bit too high interest in getting the aid money compared to actually building a company. And that's actually very, very sorry for those companies, because of course they would be part of the journey if they had stayed on. So that was how we started off, and I think it was important for us to have that aid as a very new company. CrossWorkers have no external financing. Everything has been done bootstrapped and so forth. So that was important to take the step. And I really appreciate the Danish government for doing that. It didn't work out. So I could either decide to say, well, okay, it was a journey. It wasn't that long as I had hoped for, but it stops here. And instead I said, well, I got stubborn basically, and said, of course we can do this. Of course we can carry through it. And it's a little bit like the bumblebee, whether it's flying or not and so forth. If you put it on a piece of paper, it might be something that you don't want to do. But I did it and was able to establish a company basically on my own, using the friends and the contacts that I got at that period. And we succeeded. And to be honest, it wasn't very glamorous what we started off by doing. I remember the first temporary office we had. We needed it pretty fast, and I had met some Danish guys who was running something in Egypt, and I said, "Well, do you have a space for us?" And they, of course, said, "Well, sure." And they literally emptied the cleaning room where they had all their cleaning stuff, and emptied that out, and then we put in a few desks, and that was our first office. And then shortly after, then we found a kind of a real office and started building that up, and got people hired also for the administration and so forth. And having that in mind, having that journey where we started in mind when we see our office building today, very nice building, built for us. The infrastructure in the building is really good, and connections and so forth is in place. But it's not something that you do with a clean shirt, so to say. You need to jump into some old jeans and a t-shirt sometimes and do the hard work on your own. And of course it's many hours. Not that it was dangerous, but I think I actually benefited a lot from my military background, because you get taught to find a solution, find a way. That's still a motto in the company, find a way, because of course we should always be able to find a way out of challenges and so forth. So yes, it was a tough ride, so no doubt about that. But it was worth every minute of it.
Yeah. I find it interesting to hear about the kind of like the origin story of companies, because people face, no matter what you do, there's always going to be challenges. And it is how we approach and solve and handle those challenges that build our character. And depending on what we have in, let's say, experience prior to a challenge, it defines how we experience and handle that current challenge. I speak with a lot of other people as well, and they say always the same thing. Like, it's through the hardship that I experienced in the past that allowed me and enabled me to handle the current challenges, no matter what it is. And I really love the saying that you guys have in find a way.
It's actually
no matter what.
a few years back when we had a jubilee something. I actually gave the management group a pen, a very nice pen, and it was engraved in that find a way. I also personally carry a ring on my finger. It's engraved in that on the inside, because that is the approach that you have to have when you want to do something, especially in countries like Egypt, or it could be many other places in the world. Well, both of us, we've grown up in one of the most organized parts of the world. Everything is regulated and so forth, and that's really, really nice. But it does not give us that upbringing necessarily to be able to cope with reality somewhere else in the world. And you have to have that drive. Otherwise, you will hit yourself on the way. Now, 50 years after the startup,
I think
Egypt is also a totally different country. We have to remember that. The development in Egypt has been absolutely mind-blowing when I look back over the years. And I'm sure that nowadays it would in many ways be easier. All the stones will not be removed for you, but they might be a little bit smaller as when I was doing it. So it's all about timing, and it's but you need, no matter what, you need that drive. Otherwise, forget about it.
Yeah, I think it is a nice segue to, because you mentioned a bit of the challenge of starting, and that a lot of things have changed. But there is one thing that necessarily haven't changed entirely, and that is the perception. Because I don't think a lot of companies or people in general, like, we're looking for IT professionals.
No.
Egypt is the place. It's typically like India, it's Ukraine, it's Eastern Europe. Like, what's your experience in terms of how Egypt is perceived by clients, companies you are in dialogue with, and the business world in general? Like, what's that like?
I normally say perception is reality, because you have to deal with perception when it's there. You don't get anywhere if you just claim that things are not as somebody else is saying or perceiving. You actually have to deal with that. Okay, fair enough, that's your perception. Let's try and talk about it. Let's try and get a little bit of reality into it. So in many ways, I still find, even talking with board members, C-level people, highly educated people, and so forth. And then you mentioned, well, why don't you outsource to Cairo? And their perception would be, well, but it's a war zone. There's lots of riots going on, or they will say, well, but it's just the sand and the pyramids and the Red Sea, and so forth. And reality couldn't be further away from that perception. If you look at security, if you look at international reports, the security level in Egypt is higher than it is in Sweden, for instance. Both Denmark and Norway are a little bit more secure than Egypt. But it's on a very high level. There's many European countries which are on a lower security level in terms of personal security and so forth. If you look at the infrastructure being built in Egypt, and it's especially the last approximately 12 years, which has been really moving on the infrastructure, it's quite amazing. And the will to do that, the educational institutions there, the universities, people often get surprised that there are international universities. There are German university, American university, British university, French university, and so forth. And on top of that, of course, there's also a lot of the Egyptian universities, which are amazing. And what is most important is maybe the attitude, because there's a will and an attitude, especially with the young guys and girls coming out of universities. They want to really be better in what they're doing. They really want to work hard towards their goals, and they want to move themselves. And that drive is maybe sometimes not as present in Western Europe, because things are a little bit more secure and in terms of financial situations and economical security and so forth. And one should never underestimate that personal drive in a population. And again, also, it's a young population. It's a country which knows that, well, we need to digitalize things, we need to move on things here, and so forth. So there's a wish and a need and an interest in adopting new technologies, and it's a little bit like in the old days. We were having our copper connections for telephone and so forth, but new countries were putting up mobile masts and moving into that digitalized way of communication. And it's a little bit like that. Sometimes you see these countries suddenly jump a generation or two in terms of technologies. And that's also some of the things that we see in Egypt. And then, of course, there's also just 110, 120 million people. They can't all be university level. And of course, you will see all sorts of things in a society like that. But perception is sometimes very much away from reality, especially when you talk about a country like Egypt. Yeah. And what I normally do is we run these what we call inspirational trips to Egypt. We would fly down, we would see the company, we would also see the city, we would get around and get this, the feeling of a culture. And you don't get that from a PowerPoint, you don't get it on a Teams meeting, you get it by smelling the country, so to say, or tasting the country. I've never, ever throughout the years had somebody visiting us in Egypt who didn't return to Europe and said, well, that was good. That was a positive impression that I got from that. I can see that we can do business here and so forth. Maybe they end up doing it, or maybe they don't, but they change their perception of things. And that's just really, really, really important to get that understanding, because honestly, there's an untapped resource of brain power and very well educated people in Egypt that is interested in actually working with Europe. And on the other hand, if you look at the situation in Europe, it's not only in IT, it's in all sorts of areas of business life. We face demographical challenges, and we need to look abroad. We need to look internationally, and you could choose many places in the world. I've chosen Cairo because of the reason that we just discussed. I think it's a wise choice to do. But we need, as Europe, we need to orientate ourselves somewhere else in the world, because we cannot solve it by stealing people from each other. And this is something that can actually solve it. If we look at the lack of IT skills, then it differs from country to country. But a small country like Denmark, we probably need 20,000 people or so. If we look towards Germany, we're counting hundreds of thousands of people, and so forth. We can never solve that by educating people. We can only solve it by finding something else. I usually say there are four ways to solve this challenge for Europe. We can either educate more people, we can reschool people, we can relocate people to Europe, or we can work in some sort of an international way where we work with what we call distributed teams, where we do it in Egypt or other places in the world. If we look at the three first solutions, of course we should keep on educating our own young people. There's no doubt about that. But it's just not going to solve the problem, even though we really got all the places for education and so forth. We wouldn't have the youth to fill it with. And if we look towards a strategy where we relocate people to Europe, then we run into all sorts of political discussions about that, and that will not solve it either. So, of course, it's always a combination of solutions to solve a problem. But as I see it, this is a way to solve it pretty fast, and at the same time increase the competitiveness of Europe, because that's also important, right? When our European companies are competing in the world, we're competing with a very heavy production cost. Of course, we should keep jobs also in Europe, and there will be plenty of those to be filled with the people that we have in Europe. So it's not that we're making anybody unemployed. They will still have jobs, but it's the positions that we cannot fill in Europe with European talent. We need to find a solution to that.
Do you find that this has changed given COVID, the war in Ukraine, and now Egypt entertaining and starting discussions with the EU in terms of partnerships? Do you see that this has changed in terms of the perception of going into the
There's no doubt that the COVID have helped understanding that working on the distance is a possibility. Everybody understands that now, that yes, we can actually have a meeting, especially if we met before and if we know each other and so forth. I'm personally not believing in these wild ideas that everybody should be working at a cafe or home or something like that. We still need to have a culture around us and work in some sort of a cultural team, whether it's a team in Europe or a team for our situation in Cairo. We can still keep that cultural or company culture there. That's important. That's what binds a company together. But everybody understands that, yes, it's actually possible to do a Teams meeting and actually coordinate things, and sometimes it's a lot easier and better than meeting in person. So that is something positive that COVID brought us, that understanding. Ukraine has in many ways also I wouldn't say disturbed, but there's of course a new reality. We've been living in a situation or a perception, as we talked about before, that we lived in a secure area of the world, nothing happens and so forth, and suddenly it's close to our borders. And of course the contingency of having resources and organizations running in countries or areas which are in some sort of way threatened is something that a company manager should of course consider. Another perspective is, of course, also to look at because Europe is not just Europe, right? There's a huge difference in Europe when it comes to maturity. The Nordic countries has adapted this way of working a long time ago. If you talk with Nordic companies, everybody would understand and know the option of working abroad in some sort of a distributed model. That's part of the toolbox for a Nordic company. If you just move to Germany, it's not the same maturity. They're at a different place. They will get there because they are having the biggest challenge in Europe finding IT skills, and the only way they can solve it is some sort of an international way. But that understanding comes over time. I think it's part of the Nordic culture that we are always pretty fast in adopting new things, whether it's safety belts in cars or using a distributed delivery model when you're talking about IT. And that's one of our advantages in the Nordics. There's no doubt about that. So yes, things are changing. They're always changing, and I think that definitely it will change in the direction where it actually benefits companies like ours or some of our competitors. There's no doubt about that, or similar working models.
A bunch of how international companies or international partnerships happen changed in 2018, 19 GDPR. The fact that Egypt is outside of Europe, and it opens a question about data security and GDPR. Like, what's your take on that, and what's been the experience with that?
I'll tell you a small secret. When I first heard about GDPR, my first thought was, how do I avoid that? How do I get around it? How do I find a shortcut to that? And then I sat down and said, well, that's actually a really good idea. So let's jump into it. Let's work with it. Let's go with the flow. So there are two issues. GDPR is one. Import-export of data is a second one. If you're working inside of EU, suddenly everybody is trustful, no matter where in Europe they are. They're considered very trustful, so there's not that much that you need to do. You, of course, you need to do your agreements when it comes to GDPR and so forth. When you work outside of Europe, you also have to take into account that you sooner or later are exporting data out of Europe and you're importing data, and then you have to deal with that. So there are two sides to that equation. One is the legal side. That's the easy side, because basically you contractually need to do that in a way so that you have a legal binding contract on import export and the GDPR question and so forth. That's the easiest way or easiest part of that, because everybody can do that with a few hours with a lawyer. The difficult part is, of course, to make every single employee in Egypt, in our organization there, aware of the GDPR rules, aware about why are we importing, exporting data, and why is that something that we need to address. That is the challenge, and I think there we actually have a head start compared to local competitors, because we as a Danish company, we actually understand, we know it's something which comes out of our European legislation, our culture, our understanding, and so forth, and we understand that. So of course we educate our employees in all sorts of ways so that they know how to deal with this, and of course we have all sorts of security procedures and so forth. The funny thing is that I meet a whole lot of companies in Europe, in Denmark, in Scandinavia as a whole, and so forth, where if we look at their security measurements, they're far lower than what we actually enforce in our side. if you look at the perimeter security and so forth, just as an example, I know it does not cover the whole thing, but the whole company is fenced in. There's access controls, there are biometric controls, there are video surveillance, there's a guard 24/7, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Right. So so we're dealing with it. We have a solution to it. It's definitely doable and all that. So legally, it's easy. When we come to the practical part, it's doable. It takes some time. It takes some understanding. But of course, we come with the basic understanding of what it's all about. The funny thing is, of course, that all our customers, we don't get a lot of data and keep it in our premises in Egypt, of course. All our customers, they have all their data in some sort of a data center somewhere in Europe normally. And of course, we access that. So the reality in what we actually import, export is very small quantities of data, but that does not change the situation that we actually do import, export something. And of course, we need to regulate that. So yes, it's not something that makes life easier, but it's honestly not a big challenge at all. Then there can be very, 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 very few, and it's honestly very, very few areas which are subjected to some special legislation where they're bound to work inside of Europe. But then again, just to provoke a little bit, would you feel more secure because you're doing your IT development in, let's say, Romania or Italy or Spain or somewhere in Germany or whatever, compared to doing it in Egypt? People are people, and there are also factors about the legislation regulating employees, which are actually in those areas actually better compared to, for instance, Danish legislation when it's the labor law that we're talking about. So yes, it's something that we have on our mind. Yes, it's something which is solved as a solution, and yes, it's definitely doable. Again, perception on these matters. I've had discussions with board members in larger corporations which don't believe that well, this can be done or whatever, something like that. That's a perception. Some people you actually get them to understand that it's not a challenge, and then they end up having a good business out of that. And some will stick to their perception, and yeah, then things will just be more expensive and more troubleful in Europe.
It's safe to say that you handle a lot of challenges, from the price of working with Ukraine goes up, getting into Egypt and establishing there with lacking infrastructure, lacking support, lacking funds, to working with the perception, having GDPR come in, and people perceiving Egypt as kind of, is it safe in terms of storing data? And handling all these challenges while trying to or working towards solving the staffing shortage of IT professionals in Europe, I think that is one. It's a story of perseverance. So kudos to that. What's in store for CrossWorkers looking forward? Like, what's the goal aside from continuing to work on the IT professional shortage in Europe by introducing or providing that hybrid outsourcing, offshoring type of service and delivery that you guys focus on purely?
Of course, a company like ours, it's a matter of growing in that sense, and in terms of numbers and so forth. So that will always be an ambition to do that. But it's when you work with a country like Egypt for such a long time, you also adapt the country. When I talk with Egyptians in Egypt, I normally say that my heart is Danish, but when I'm in Egypt, it will pump Egyptian blood. And one of the things that makes me excited and happy is to see the impact that we're doing also. one thing is that we're solving challenges for companies and customers in order to get their resources. We're also having a business. We're making a profit and so forth. But the real pleasure is to see the impact that we're doing, introducing work environments which are different, having a different management style. We're not introducing a Danish management style in Egypt, but we're introducing a mixture of you call it the Scandinavian management style, and then of course dealing with it in a local way. That's amazing to see the results of that and see that impact. And that also means that you want to help the country basically without getting anything out of that personally, but you get the personal satisfaction of helping and supporting a country, and helping and supporting the trade between the countries and the communication between the countries on a different and sometimes much higher level, and that's interesting. It's not more than a week ago that Denmark introduced a whole new African strategy, which actually connects very well into how we see things working in out of Egypt. And one of the obvious ways into Africa is, of course, Egypt, because when you want to go into to a continent like Africa, you want to step somewhere where it's secure first, and I'm quite happy to see that has been followed up in this African strategy. So I think that the connection between Egypt and Denmark, and Egypt and Europe will increase in coming years. Egypt has also signed an agreement with the EU, so it's a strategical partner country for Egypt for EU, which means quite a lot in terms of political focus, and some of the programs and some of the businesses that are following that.
Yeah, this has been really good, and it's, as I mentioned, it's a story of how to overcome challenges and finding that way. So I think that might be a bit of the kind of like the core essence in this episode. I want to end with one last thing, and that is, it's kind of like a big question, and that is, it goes something like this: if you could get an answer to one question related to your business and what you do, Hans, what would it be, and what would you like to know?
Yeah, I think a lot of industry owners or company owners would have a more financial figure and answer to that. For me, it would be amazing. It's not something that you can do, but if I somehow could get that picture of all the souls that I've touched, either directly or indirectly, all the small push that we've made, things that we've changed, and thereby seeing the whole impact of all our efforts, all the things that we've been doing throughout the years. That would be something to that I would really like to kind of frame it and put it on the wall. But it's an impossible picture to make. But that's actually what makes me happy to think about the changes and the impact that one make, either individually or through the company. Companies will exist no matter whether I'm here or not. Things will change. Profit that are earned will be used and so forth, but impact that is embedded in people, that stays, and that's actually what makes me most happy, and therefore it would be that would be the picture to if I could choose something to have.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Seeing the impact, how you change lives,
and that's
basically.
actually some.
I think that is
just a small note to that because we started off by saying, well, why Egypt? How did you do, and all the challenges and so forth. And I think one of the lessons learned is that you need to understand that when you're dealing with a country like Egypt or other places in the world, you need to understand that you need to do more than business. You need to do impact. That's a respect for culture, and it's an obligation because you suddenly have a strong hand to work with.
One final thing is because I think that question in terms of seeing the impact or being able to see that picture of the impact, I think that's super beautiful. If someone wants to learn more about you, Hans, read about CrossWorkers, or follow the work that you guys do, what's the best place to find you guys?
In these times, websites are always good. So our website is crossworkers.com. Everybody's welcome to visit that, of course. There's lots of videos and white papers, and of course we would be more than happy to engage with people who wants to learn more about what we do. Or it could also be if somebody wants to do something together with Egypt, reach out and we'll try and help. There's no doubt about that. So the easiest way is the website, I guess.